Hey everybody, I'm Joe Wenke. I'm the author of The Human Agenda, Conversations about Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. And before we get going with the questions, just a little bit of background on the book. Like a lot of people, I'm concerned about the fact that we're increasingly polarized as a culture and a country on so many different issues. I'd wanted to do a book for some time on the issues of sexual orientation and gender identity, but I wanted to figure out a way of approaching those issues where maybe we could find common ground. And I thought, hey, maybe the best way is the simplest way. And maybe if we just have conversations, if we tell stories about ourselves, share our dreams, our aspirations, our passions, personally, professionally, that'd be the way to do it. And so that's what I did. I reached out to a group of really amazing people in the LGBTQI community, some of them pretty well known, others not. So Ian Harvey, trans man comedian, Giselle Alicia, transgender woman supermodel, people you may not have heard of, like Dr. Karis Mazzarella, who's a transgender woman and an emergency physician, Kevin Fisher-Paulson, who together with his husband Brian were foster parents, Aidan Key, who works with transgender children and their families, and we all just talked about our lives, our work, and as I said, our dreams and our aspirations and our passions, and that's the book. It's not really interviews, it's conversations, and that's the Human Agenda. So there's a little background. Without further ado, I'll start taking some questions. So what's the biggest challenge the LGBTQI community faces? I really think it is to be accepted as equally authentic, that it's as authentic to be gay or queer as it is to be straight, and it's as authentic to be transgender as it is to be cisgender. I think it's an amazing accomplishment that we're on the verge, perhaps, of the Supreme Court saying that everybody has the right to marry anyone they choose. But to me, that reflects growing tolerance. Again, that's great. I think we're still not at acceptance, which is a bit condescending, I think, that somebody who has some level of privilege in society accepts someone who doesn't. What I'm looking for is equality. What I'm looking for is for a growing number of people to say, it's just as authentic to have gay sex as straight sex. It's as authentic to be transgender as cisgender. So I think that's a really big challenge. I think we're a long way off, but we're making progress and we're working toward that goal. Here's the next question. Do you find that the media represents gay women more than they represent gay men? I don't know how to calibrate that. I still think that there is a big difference in how people view and perhaps accept gay women and gay men. I think a lot of straight guys have sexual fantasies about, women having sex with each other, and maybe that plays into it. And I also think that it's still radioactive, despite growing tolerance, for two men to walk down the street holding hands. That freaks out a lot of people. That gets people upset. So I do think that there's a different perception out there in the media, but just really in the world itself, in the straight world, between the perception of gay women and gay men. Next question. Where did the title come from? Did you have anything else as a working title before the Human Agenda was chosen? No, actually what happened was I was writing an article for the Huffington Post about the persistence of the hate speech term, the homosexual agenda. It's still used all the time. Go on Right Wing Watch. You'll see the religious right haters using it constantly. It's a coined phrase to suggest that there's a vast conspiracy of gay people trying to undermine the morality and the values of America. And obviously, there is no such conspiracy. Everybody's just going around living their lives. And it just occurred to me that the homosexual agenda doesn't even exist. There's really just the human agenda. And what that means is that we all have the same goals, reflected in the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all just want to live our lives as we choose, to be left alone, to be free, and to be happy. And so I began tweeting that the homosexual agenda doesn't really exist. It's the human agenda, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The same thing is true about the transgender agenda. And I thought that would be the perfect title for a book in which people from the LGBTQI community simply have conversations about themselves. We all talk, and we're all just sharing as human beings. So that was always the title, and that's the genesis of the title in the book. If you could interview anyone in the LGBTQI community, no limits, who would it be, and what's one question you would ask them? That's kind of hard because I mean, I really thought it was great to interview the people or to talk to the people that I did talk to. There are some people I didn't get to. I think it would be great to talk to Laverne Cox because of her experience and to understand what it means to her to have achieved what she has achieved at that level. Maybe some of these things are obvious. I'd also like to talk about Barney Frank. How do you survive in Congress for years and years and years as a gay man? But you know something, I think maybe people I have never even heard of and don't know currently would be even more interesting to talk about. I'm really focused on getting real stories of real people living their lives and what do they have to deal with on a daily basis. How about a transgender woman who doesn't, quote, pass at all? What is her life like? Or a transgender person who is just coming out and is maybe in their 60s or their 70s. Of course, Bruce Jenner is a little bit like that. But what is it like to have lived as a transgender person and never come out, and now you are coming out? I guess that's also the story of Transparent. So, it's very rich when you open yourself up to other people and their stories. And I think, again, what the human agenda shows is that it's not about whether you're famous or not. Everybody has a story, and when they open up and talk about their lives honestly, authentically, it's very compelling. What do you think about Orange is the New Black and the popularity surrounding it right now? Well, that's what I was getting into and saying I'd like to talk to Laverne Cox. I'd like to talk more and more about people who are on this cutting edge of becoming known to the public. Did have a few people like that in the book. I mentioned Giselle Alisi and Ian Harvey, also Carmen Carrera. So it was great talking to them. I'd like to understand better from a personal standpoint what it is like to suddenly have a voice and an audience and an outlet for your creativity and for what it is that you want to express that perhaps you never imagined you would have and that you certainly didn't have before. And I do think that getting the message out in pop culture is really important. I don't think anybody should trivialize that in any way. And I think the more people get to know transgender people, the more they're going to see they're just like everybody else. I do think the reason that marriage equality is growing in support is that so many gay people have come out. If your brother, your sister, son, daughter is gay, you can't objectify gay people as easily, and it's pretty hard to say, hey, you don't have a right to marry whoever you want. A lot of people still don't know, never met, or they think they haven't met any transgender people. And so just learning about what it means to be transgender, even in pop culture, on television shows, etc., is really important. Next question. Oh, here we go. Do you think there's a stigma around being transgender? I think transgender people, particularly women, are among the most marginalized and discriminated against people in the world. That remains true to this very day. If you are a transgender woman and you don't quote-unquote pass, which means that your appearance conforms to what people think a woman should look like, it's dangerous for you to walk down the street. If you're a beautiful transgender woman, it's dangerous for you to sit at a bar by yourself or be in a club and be approached by a straight guy who thinks that you're a cisgender beautiful woman. And you're put in this awkward position of either not letting that person know because you don't intend to get to know them anyway, or to reveal something very personal about yourself. So there is a stigma. It's disgusting. It's based on ignorance and bigotry, but it's certainly there. And I do find that, unlike the issue of marriage equality, when I talk about gender identity, it's really a topic that people have not even thought about in many cases previously. Progressive, educated people. And even when you speak about it, on a TV show or a radio program, and there's a great discussion, I still have the feeling that people don't really understand what I'm talking about. So I think that we're at the very beginning of beginning to lift that stigma of being a transgender. Another question. Was there anything shocking you learned while conducting these unique conversations with different personalities? I don't know if it was shocking, but I did not know until I spoke with Aidan Key, who works with transgender children and their families out of Seattle Children's Hospital and other locations around Seattle, that some children identify as transgender almost as soon as they can speak. Most of his clients are a little bit older, but guess what? That's 5 or 6 years old. So some human beings identify as transgender from the very beginning. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting when we talked was, how is it even possible to imagine before this very moment that a child that young identifying as transgender would be from the very beginning supported by their parents? How would they not be told that they're confused at age 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 when, a biological boy says, I'm a little girl? How would that happen? So then how would transgender people be able to grow up without having bad feelings about themselves? Thus, this mythical dysphoria thing that the medical community talks about, and about which there's really no scientific evidence, except transgender people feel bad about themselves. Well, how would you not feel bad about yourself if you're treated really badly your entire life and told that you're confused, you're wrong, you're perverted, you're immoral, etc.? So it was amazing to learn that fact. And there were many amazing things, but that's just one that I would point out as particularly striking to me. How do you deal with negative reviews or comments in regards to the topic you're talking about? I get really annoyed when people are totally ignorant. And I have to say, I get annoyed with Amazon reviews where it's obvious the person didn't even read the book, or they say they didn't read the book, and just reject it immediately, or they're trying to just puff up the number of fake reviews that they have. If there's a negative review that's based on something authentic and substantial and there's a disagreement, I'm all for that. It's great if we have different points of view. But I do get annoyed when people are phony and dishonest and haven't read the book, or when they're just ideologues who don't have open minds. What does it mean to be transgender? What it means to be transgender is that your gender identity is different from your biological gender. So what it means is if you're born with a penis, you don't identify as being a boy, you identify as being a girl. If you're born with a vagina, you identify as being a boy rather than a girl. That's it. But it's just a difference, and my big point too is that gender exists on a spectrum. Just think about all the different kinds of men and women there are, even though they still identify with their biological gender, but we just haven't thought of gender that way. So that's what's new here. And gender identity to me is simply how you experience and communicate gender. Transgender people have a gender identity that is not the same as their biological gender. It's just a difference. That's all it is. Can you talk about the book cover for The Human Agenda? It's so amazing. Thank you very much. How was that design put together? Well, I wanted to show a beautiful human being, not necessarily white or black, who could be a cisgender man or woman or a transgender man or woman. And I wanted to have that image suggest just the beauty of humanity and the beauty of diversity. And it took a lot of work to get to that image, but we finally got there, and I'm very happy with it, and I do think it's a very striking book cover. How did you go about choosing who you were going to talk to in the book? Well, working with a great group of people, we had this idea of reaching out to a really diverse group of LGBTQI people, and we were able to do that. Also, let me just say, too, the I of the LGBTQI is intersex, and I'm really happy that Hida Valoria is part of the book because it's even less well understood, I think, what it means to be intersex than it is what it means to be transgender. And that was an amazing conversation. I think that there's still this stereotype that gay people, at least, are like all in one little bucket and they're all the same, when they're absolutely diverse, and that's just the sexual orientation of those people. So I really love the diversity of the people that we're talking to. Another person who personifies that is Y Love, who happens to be an African-American Jewish gay rapper. So he really sums up what I was trying to do. Talk to as diverse a group of people as possible, and everybody just shares their stories of what it means to be human. What advice would you give someone who wanted to come out to their parents but were scared to do so? So this is something that we talk about a lot in the book, particularly with Kristen Russo, who's the co-founder of EveryoneIsGay.com, along with Danielle Owens-Reed. And it's really important, I think, to say that people need to come out when they're ready to come out. You are risking a lot when you come out, because even if you have understanding parents, you don't know how they're going to react. So you are risking rejection from people who love you. But when the time is right, I think it's very liberating to do that. And as I mentioned before, this is how we've made social progress, I think, on marriage equality. So the more brave people who are out there, the more important it is. Now, if you're a writer, I think you need to be out in whatever sense that, makes sense to you, whether you're straight, gay, transgender, whatever. Especially if you're an activist writer, you just need to be out about what you really think. But I think the advice I would give someone is to make sure that you are ready to come out, make sure the time is right for you, and make sure that you have support in coming out, perhaps prior to coming out to your parents, from other people that you can talk to about their response to you. What do you think is who is the most influential person in the LGBT community right now? I don't think that there's any one most influential person. I think it's really more about unknown people living their lives. That's the big influence. That's what's changing things. Even though it's important for people who are out in the media, doing TV shows, doing music, doing fashion, all of those things, writing, it's really up to every single individual to affect the people that they know. We need to have role models, but we need everybody to be authentic to the extent that it's possible in their own lives. Do you think that everyone has gay tendencies? I think that sexual orientation exists on a spectrum. It's pretty hard to imagine that there are 6.5 billion people and that everybody born with a penis is attracted to a woman, or everybody born with a vagina is attracted to a man, except for a few exceptions. I think that's nonsense. I think we're all suppressed as a culture. And I can't really calibrate to what degree somebody is, has gay tendencies or is attracted to somebody of their own sex. But I do think that if people were really in touch with themselves, they would have to admit attraction. And, there's a fine line, too, between sexuality and sensuality, emotional connections. So I think as we become more and more open, people are going to realize that they have feelings that maybe they haven't acknowledged. And so I think in that sense, it's true that a lot of people have gay tendencies. You regularly write articles for the Huffington Post. Do you ever get negative comments in your pieces? Well, I used to write regularly for the Huffington Post. Then I got fed up with the Huffington Post for a while. Maybe I'll start doing that again. But yeah, you get lots and lots of negative comments if you do anything. Because some people just love to hate on what other people do on social media and on the internet. But you get a lot of praise and support as well. And so, as I was saying earlier, I love negative feedback if it's based on something substantial or if it's thoughtful. It's not even negative then. It's the old constructive criticism. But if people are just going to attack and dismiss, then that's just a waste of time. Do you think that your strict Catholic upbringing had any effect on how you grew as a person? Yes, it stunted my growth and almost killed me. But yeah, I mean, our upbringing has an amazing, tremendous effect on us, and I think we carry that through our entire lives. So, like, for example, even though I rejected my Catholic beliefs a million years ago, I still sort of evaluate everything in the terms that I was taught. Like, I think of everything in moral terms, and I analyze everything, and I'm constantly thinking about what I do as to whether it's right or wrong. This goes back to the point that I made about, transgender kids. If you're told that you're screwed up and you're confused and there's something wrong with you when you're 5 years old, it's almost impossible to overcome that. It's just there as a fact. You overcome it. You say, no, that's not true, but it still affects you at a visceral level, at an unconscious level. And so I think anybody brought up in any kind of a strict environment where everybody thinks one way and it turns out you don't fit in there, that's going to affect you. And I began feeling like I didn't fit into that environment when I was 11 and a half, 12 years old. So I think a lot of people have that experience. It may not be a Catholic upbringing. It could be Jewish. It could be, brought up in an Islamic household. So it could be about religion, or it could even be about politics, and you just don't fit in. But it continues to affect you for the rest of your life. You also write books of poetry. Where did love for that type of storytelling come from? Well, I always sporadically wrote poetry, and I've always loved reading poetry, and I have a love of literature. I guess that's why I ended up getting a Ph.D., reading a lot. And I don't know why I'm writing lots of poetry now. It just started happening last July. And instead of writing an occasional poem, I just started writing them constantly, and I've written a couple of hundred poems since then. So I started publishing them as books. I've had 2 books of poetry out, free air, looking for Potholes. I finished 2 others. The next one out, I think probably around September, is called Dirty Pool. And I have 1 done after that, and I'm almost done yet another one. It makes my day when I write a poem. It makes me feel good about myself. It's storytelling to me as revelation. You have a little insight, a little epiphany, and you want to pass that along to somebody else. And you get to do wordplay, and it's very short form, at least the way I do it, communication. And so I just love it. And it's a little bit too like writing song lyrics. It's like baking a little cake, as somebody once said, and then when it's done, you have something there that you didn't have before. So I really love writing poetry, and I love sharing it with people. And I'm also trying to counter the idea that poetry is hard to read or it's a drag. And so the poems I write, I try to make immediately accessible, a lot of times funny, or if I can make funny or witty, and a little surprise. And it just sort of gives you a little something extra in your day that you didn't have before, maybe even like a funny joke that you hear. So that's what poetry is for me. Do you have any upcoming events that we can come and chat with you? Yes, I have a whole bunch of upcoming events. I am going to be at the Hartford Library. I'm not going to remember the dates for any of these things. That's the end of May. I'm going to be in northern New Jersey at another library panel discussion. I am going to be in Baltimore. I'm going to be in San Francisco. So I'm running all around doing all these things. And these are fun events. They're very interactive. They're conversations with people in the book and me, and then conversations with the audience. So we just had one in Seattle, had a whole bunch of people there, and it was a very lively conversation with everybody participating. So, if you see that I'm coming around, come out and check me out, and let's have a great time. Do you have any tips for writing dialogue in novels? I think that's a lot of fun for me to do. It was a lot of fun in the talk show. And the way that I do it is I really create in my own mind a character, and I put them in a situation with another character, and I just go and imagine what happens. And I'm just doing 2 parts of a conversation. And my advice is to just let it flow and not think too much about it, and really have it be like a conversation. If you have to revise it afterwards, do that. But just let it go, and that's how I try to write everything. I don't like it to be painful. I like it to be almost like beat poetry, and just let it rip. And that's the most fun thing to do, and that's where I at least get the best results. Are you watching any shows right now that you can't get enough of? Actually, I'm not. I need to start doing that more. Usually the only TV I watch is all about politics. It's the MSNBC and other cable talk shows. Otherwise, I'm just really working all the time. So I have a very boring life and a very solitary life, and I'm not watching that much TV. What are some other things you enjoy? Do you have any hobbies? Yes, one hobby is playing music, and I just built a recording studio into my basement, and I'm going to be doing some stuff with my kids, and also Giselle, who's in Human Agenda, is a great singer. So she's teaming up with me and my son Ryan and my daughter Olivia, and we're going to be doing some stuff, and if we think any of it's good, you might see it on iTunes or YouTube. The other thing I like to do is to eat at the best restaurants in Manhattan. So like 11 Madison Park, per se, Le Bernardin, Danielle, Dovetail, Gramercy Tavern. I eat there a few times a week. That's what I like to do. What's next for you? Do you have anything else you are currently working on? Well, I'm trying to plan the follow-up to the Human Agenda, and don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's going to be multiple issues that divide us as a country and a culture, taking a similar approach, having conversations, and as I mentioned, writing lots of poetry, and I'm also thinking about a sequel to the talk show. So I have a lot of ideas for more stuff to do, and I'm just writing all the time. At this point, that's what I enjoy doing. At some point, it may stop, like turning off the faucet, but right now it's working. What is the best advice you ever got regarding sexual orientation and gender identity? I don't even think I've gotten good advice on it. The best advice I would say, let me take that back, that I did get, probably came from Giselle, and it's in our conversation. All of the people in the book are really different. In Giselle's case, she's a model. She was in Vogue and Vanity Fair. And it's like, well, how the heck did you do that? And her response is, I was just myself. I'm just real and honest. I try to be professional. And she was just discovered walking down the street and began modeling actually 15 years ago. But that advice is to be true to yourself. I mean, maybe that's the oldest advice that you could possibly give. But with regard to one's sexual orientation, gender identity, to me, it's be real and be true to yourself, and don't care what other people think about you. I think that's important advice as well. I've just sort of been built that way. I never cared when I was a kid what other people thought about me. It doesn't mean I don't have feelings. I just don't really care what's going on inside the mind of a stranger. It doesn't make any sense to me. So be true to yourself and be real. That's the best advice. Do you have any idea what needs to be done in order to get equality for all? I really think we all have to, as I've said before, just keep living our lives authentically. It's pretty discouraging when you look at what's going on in the world and you look at certain issues that don't ever seem to get any better, like issues regarding race. We think we're making progress with laws, for example, but then have people's feelings really changed. But I think we all just have to live our lives authentically and perhaps have an impact on the people we meet. And I think the more people who are true to themselves, that's what I was just saying in the answer to the last question, the more progress we will make in terms of equality for all. If you're authentic, I think you command respect. And some people with open minds and hearts will acknowledge that, whereas maybe before they didn't. Any more questions? Here's one more. What's the biggest misconception people have about being an LGBT supporter? I don't know, maybe that like you're trying to cause trouble, or be quiet and leave us alone, or again that LGBT people are really different from everybody else. No, we're all really pretty much the same. We just have different sexual orientation and/or gender identity. I think there's a misconception about any activist, and a lot of times people who are activists are maligned. I do think, as a writer, for me at least, it's important to be an activist, and what I'm trying to do is to change people's perspectives. to disturb. That's the purpose of art, but to do it in the sense of moving somebody from one position to another. And I think that it is a very positive thing. I almost said noble. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it, but I think it's important to stand up for what you believe in, and that's what it means to me to be an LGBT supporter. Okay, so we're at the end of the chat, and I just want to thank everybody, and hope you enjoyed the chat, and enter the contest we have on BookTrib to win a copy of The Human Agenda. So thanks a lot. Have a great day, everybody.